Slideshow is going to focus on the geography of southern and eastern Africa. In eastern Africa, there are some amazing and beautiful landforms that are found throughout the region, eastern and southern Africa. One of them that we'll talk about first is the Great Rift Valley. The Great Rift Valley is at a place where there are two divergent tectonic plates. So those plates that are under the ground are sliding away from each other, and that is causing the land to sink into a steep valley. Okay, think of it like almost like cliffs off of the sides of it. You can see it in the first picture right here. Okay, and so there are a lot of different landforms within this valley. There are these high plateaus like you see there, flat land that's up high in the air. There are mountain ranges, and then in between these things there are these huge flat plains. All right, and so you can see the Great Rift Valley there, which is one of the defining landforms of Africa. The second one is Mount Kilimanjaro. Mount Kilimanjaro is the tallest point in Africa. This is a picture of Mount Kilimanjaro right there. It is 19,341 feet high, and it is found in Tanzania. Also, the lakes and rivers are extremely important to Africa, as well as everywhere in the world, because of their ability to support plant, animal, and human life. They can be used for water, a source of water. They can be used to transport things. They can be used as habitats for animals. Lakes and rivers are very, very important. Okay. The Nile River, which is this picture right here, is the longest river in the entire world, as probably many of you already know. And then Lake Victoria is Africa's largest lake. Lake Victoria is so big, it touches many countries. It touches Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania, and Kenya. Last but not least, the deserts are one of the amazing landforms, and they kind of form a ring around the region. So on the east side is the coast, so it's touching the ocean, but all along the west side of this region is the Namib Desert, and then on the south is the Kalahari Desert, and then on the north you see the Sahara and the Nubian Desert. And so deserts are kind of ringing all around the entire region. Talked about many of the reasons that rivers are so important to the people, but also they're just a major transportation route, so you can move people and move goods from one place to another. Now, the problem is that doesn't help all of the people, because some of the people are stuck with some of these other landforms, and one of them is the Sud Swamp. The Sud Swamp is a giant swamp where there are these huge floating mats of vegetation. So if you're think of like plants is what we're talking about there, and this tall papyrus that doesn't allow the boats to come through. It's really hard for these big ships to pass through, and because of that, it can really hurt the economy and the movement of some of the countries that have to deal with this gigantic swamp known as the Sud Swamp. Because this region is so big and is on both sides of the equator, there's a lot of variance, there's a lot of change, a lot of difference between the ecosystems that are found here. Up in the north, you have the Sahara Desert, which is really dry and warm, and then you have on the equator, where it's much wetter, down just a little bit further south, and they're also affected by a lot of the wind patterns that cause these seasonal rains that we talked about in West and Central Africa. They're running into the same kinds of things. However, it is a little bit different. It's a little bit less variable, a little bit less changing, because it has a higher elevation. So the temperature does not get quite as hot around the equator, and it's not quite as wet around the equator either. Not quite as much rain because of that elevation, because of how high in the air the land is. And so, for instance, Mount Kilimanjaro and Mount Kenya, they always have snow on top of them all the time because of how high their elevation is. They're snow-capped constantly, and they're really near the equator. So even though it's supposed to be warm there, it's when you go up high enough, it's still a snow-capped mountain up there. And the region also has many forests, which are home to a lot of different animals used as a habitat, many different kinds of birds, leopards, gorillas, Many animals live there. The savanna, however, is the really most important ecosystem that we're going to talk about. It's the defining ecosystem of this region. So it's the most important one. It's the most well-known one. This is where you would have safaris and things like that you've heard of. Okay, and so what the savanna is it's a flat, grassy plain with not a whole lot of trees, but there are some trees. So there's few trees in that area. The most famous and biggest one is the Serengeti Plain. That's found in Kenya and Tanzania. A lot of different animals live there, and it gives the region, the animals and the land itself, give the region the identity that Africa has. Okay, especially this part of Africa. And also, some of these animals that live there, giant herds of elephants, lions, wildebeest, zebras, giraffes, gazelles, all of these different things. Some of the animals that you think about when you think Africa. The time to write out the answer to this checkpoint. There are many animals in Africa that are endangered, and they're endangered because of loss of habitat. The places that they live have been destroyed, as well as poaching. And poaching is illegal hunting. Okay, so you're not allowed to hunt these animals because they're endangered, or not allowed to hunt in a certain area, but people still do it. You can see a picture of a poacher right here, cutting off the horn of a rhinoceros, all right, which eventually leads to that rhinoceros dying. And so it is a big problem. People are trying to fight it, trying to do the best they can, but as long as people value the parts of these animals, it's going to be really difficult to stop without really strong regulation and a lot of people there to stop the poaching. The animals are, however, helped by ecotourism. Ecotourism is a good thing, so a lot of visitors come to this area, go on safari, and try to learn about conservation. How can they help these animals? And while they're there, they try to do as little harm as possible to the environment as well. Many of the countries are also trying to protect the animals by setting up national parks. Okay, this helps ecotourism because it gets more people to come in and watch and look at these animals. And it also stops from habitat destruction, which is on the bottom part here. Okay, and habitat destruction is when you go into an area and you ruin the place that these animals live by cutting down their trees and using it for human purposes. Things like farming or digging into the ground to get whatever mineral or metal or gem or whatever else you're trying to find inside of that ground. And so we'll take some time to talk about that mining that happens in Africa, South and East Africa especially. South Africa, the southern part, has the most of all of the southern part of this region has the most of all of these resources. Okay, and some of the resources, I've got a long list here, and I think you have to write them all in your notes, 1 through 7. Okay, but precious gemstones like diamonds are found in the region, as well as precious metals such as gold and platinum. Okay, and then also other metals and minerals and things like that that are used in industry, that are used in factories to make other things. Things like copper, tin, iron, uranium are all important resources that are mined in parts of Africa. And again, the southern part has the most. Okay, but some of the countries have a bunch of resources in them, and some of them only have a few. The country of South Africa has the most of any of them, and that helps them because there are positive parts to mining. Right now you have to look at that positive and negative, okay? And it helps, obviously, to make money. So there's a positive right there, okay? It helps to make money and to build up your economy. However, there are a lot of negatives to mining too. Okay, first off, it's kind of bad for the people who are working in it because the jobs are very, very dangerous and they're often done in bad conditions. So there's a negative. Okay, and also it is horrible for the environment. Okay, so you are causing all of these environmental problems because when you're cutting in, you're leaving these huge holes and these huge scars in the earth. You're also the machines and different things that you're using are causing air pollution and water pollution and kind of tainting those necessity resources that you have. So you're wrecking your water in your air to get whatever gold or diamonds or whatever else that you're trying to make money off of. These countries also do some sort of farming. In the southern part, in South Africa in particular, there's really good land, and so they have huge plantations. We've talked about that word before, where they're making a whole bunch of crops to try and sell it to people. Things like sugarcane, cotton, avocados, tropical fruits. These are things that are grown in South Africa. But for a lot of the countries, especially in the east, it's really dry, and so it's really difficult to farm. All right, there's not a regular rainfall, so there are times when you get a whole lot of rain, and then there's times, long stretches of periods of time where you don't get very much at all. And so countries like Sudan and Ethiopia and Somalia and Namibia all have struggle for water. Okay, so in order to grow crops, they need to use irrigation. Irrigation are machines that bring water to that area from a river that's close by, from the groundwater, from wherever you can get that water. These machines are necessary in order to grow anything. One crop that is grown in this area in Ethiopia is coffee. Coffee is kind of their major export, and it's thought that Ethiopia is the first place that coffee was ever grown as an export, and so that's kind of interesting. The other thing that you can do in dry parts, because you don't need quite as much water, is to raise livestock, which is farm animals. So you're trying to, raise goats or cows or whatever else. Okay, the big struggle with that in these regions is that you have herds of these animals, which are generally prey animals, animals that are not out hunting other animals, and you are the one that has to defend them from herds of wild predator animals. And in a region where there are very large predators, that can be difficult sometimes, especially throughout the savanna regions of Africa. One of the region's biggest challenges is water. Okay, the reason being, a lot of the places don't have enough water. Right, and if you have enough water, you're great. You can grow crops, you can do whatever you need to, you can feed your people, right? And your people have full bellies. But if you don't have enough water, then you don't have enough food. You can't grow anything, and possibly you could have famine where large numbers of people are starving. And so if we look at a couple of the countries where this famine happens, in Sudan and Ethiopia, these countries rely on food aid from other countries, where they're getting food from places like America and other countries that are trying to help out. They rely on this way more than most other countries in the world. Now, the rivers help, obviously. A big pool of water flowing through is great. And so one of the positive ways that they do this is the people in those countries, they build dams. And the dams, again, provide electricity, which we talked about in the last set of notes, but also they provide water for irrigation. So now you have this big pool of water to draw out of with your machines to water your crops. However, the dams can also cause conflict, because when you dam a river, when you stop a river or slow the flow of a river, okay, whoever's the next in line, the next country that river goes through, doesn't get as much water. And so you are giving yourself extra water to take, but you're taking it away from the next person in line. And so an example is a dam in Uganda that was grown, and it has slowed the flow of water into Sudan and caused it to be one of these countries that really has to rely on that food aid from other countries. So it becomes a question of who has the right to control the water. Take some time to write out the answer to checkpoint number 2. The last problem that we're going to talk about in Africa, disease in South and East Africa, is disease. Some of these diseases are created by the environment, and some are non-environmental. All right, so we have 3 of them that were caused by the environment. Right there, and right there. Okay, and the first one is malaria. Malaria is carried by mosquitoes, and so and then put into your blood system through the mosquitoes. The tsetse fly also carries sleeping sickness, which can kill people as well as the cattle. So the cows can be killed by this fly too, which makes it almost impossible in areas that are really have a lot of tsetse flies. It makes it impossible to have livestock and have cattle, have cows. And then a lack of clean water can cause a lot of different diseases from people using the dirty water. Okay, cholera, river blindness are really common in these areas of Africa. However, the biggest problem really comes from a non-environmental disease, and that is AIDS. Okay, AIDS is at an epidemic proportion. If we look, or if we think about the numbers in the United States, about 0.6% of the people in America are HIV positive, have AIDS. In Somalia, it's almost 2 times as much at 1%. Okay, but that's not even a bad number. It's not even a bad country for AIDS compared to the other ones. If we go down to South Africa, which is in this region too, it is 18.1% of all the people in South Africa have AIDS. And you would think that's insane. That's 1 in every 5 people pretty much that have AIDS. But we can even move on to another country that's near South Africa. Swaziland has about 38.8% of the people in that country have AIDS. So when you think about it, we're close to 40% there. That means 4 out of every 10 people have this disease, have AIDS. And you can see over here some of the diseases that cause the most deaths in Africa, and you can see that HIV/AIDS is definitely the top one. And then we look at those clean water diseases, the diarrheal diseases. We see malaria, 62.1 out of every 100,000 deaths per year in Africa. And then we go down the line and you can see some of the other things. But malaria carried by mosquitoes, diarrheal diseases caused by that lack of clean water, and HIV/AIDS are huge killers in the area.